This week's tip, again, was a request from someone who was curious about circular needles, or knitting in the round. And their question was, how do you do the math for double-pointed needles, magic loop, and knitting with 2 circulars? And this is math even I can do. And this is a project I'm doing, this is a top-down raglan dress. And I prefer knitting in the round with 1 circular. And the circular that I want to use is this one, and it's not very long, and it was not long enough to work the initial few rows. So until I can transfer it to this needle, which I actually could do now, I put it on double points. I just found it a little easier to work. And I had 104 stitches, so if you divide 104 by 4 needles, because I'm using 5 circulars, 1 to knit off onto and 4 stitches to store my needles, and that is 26 stitches per needle. And is it important if the math is exact? No, does not matter at all. It could be 20 stitches on one needle and 30 on the next, and the other stitches divided up between the other 2. It makes no difference. Now, when you use double-pointed needles, what you want to be careful of is if you keep your stitches on these needles the whole time, you can develop ladders where the needles join. And in order to avoid that, if you're working on double-pointed needles, what you do is you just knit 1 more stitch on each needle at each round. And what that does is it keeps your needles moving around, and you don't have those ladders. Now, another way that I can work with this, and I could have done this initially, was to use either the magic loop or 2 circular needles at one time. And I'm going to do 2 circulars next, but I'm going to pause the video so that I can knit this row. Well, I can actually go ahead and knit for a bit. So if you want to change from one type of needle to another, you just simply get that other needle and you start to work with it. And these double-pointed needles are heavy. These are size 8s, pretty unpleasant to knit with, actually. So I'm going to be switching over, and you just start to work. Knit, knit, knit. And when you come back, I'm going to have half of the stitches on this needle and half of the stitches on the other needle. So now I have my stitches on 2 needles, and I've got 2 different circular needles, both of which are fairly long. And if you're going to do this technique, and this is one that I've found least satisfactory because there's some inherent problems. Anytime you have a bunch of needles, you got the potential for issues. Now, notice that here's my working yarn, and here's where I want to pick up. Now, if you're going to use this technique, you want to have some way to make sure that the needles are different. I can't recommend what I've done. I've used a carbon and a metal needle, and these sometimes produce different results when you knit. So if you're using carbons, you want to use 2 carbons needles. If you're using metal, you want to use 2 metal, and wood, and so on. Because the problem is you may get some uneven results. Now, when I get to this point, I'm going to want to start knitting with my blue needle. And so I'm going to pull that one down so that it's the working needle. And what I want to make sure I don't do is pull the different needle and start working, because then I'm going to be forced to doing the magic loop because I'll have all of my stitches on one needle. So I want to make sure that I use the same needle. And I would just continue to work from here. And when I got to this point, I would want to make sure that I'm using the black needles. And I think I'm demonstrating now why this can be a pain. The people who love this technique love it. More power to them. It's just something I have had difficulty working with. So I'm going to pause the video again, and I'm going to put all of the stitches on one needle and show you the magic loop.